Hey everybody, so I'm up late working on books. I had a shift get canceled at the machine shop, so thought I'd be a little productive writing the third Adrian Campbell book, and for break that I would keep a YouTube stream open live for Q&A. So this is me keeping the YouTube stream open live for Q&A. When I get this done, I'll probably put timestamp any actual questions in the chat. So hopefully there'll be a lot to talk about. I'm doing this stand up. I'm gonna probably stand up and move around. I've been sitting down for like 2 hours now. Oh gosh, yep. There's the lights. So it's gonna be a little blurry, but a viewer, gee, I wonder if it's Cam. So random viewer who may or may not be Cam. I'm gonna do some dishes, and you can throw me some random questions and answers if you got them. Yeah, I'm taking a quick break from working on the third Adrian Campbell book, and thought I'd stand up and make my bachelor pad a little more habitable. So, but if you got a question for me, because I was going to do a live Q&A, feel free to throw one at me, and we'll take a shot at it. I keep a really clean workspace, and I don't necessarily. By the time I get home, I'm done with cleaning. So I'm trying to fix that. So what would you like me to talk about? Or if you have a question for me, I can try and challenge it. Take a crack at it. Just let me know. So I just talk randomly. What is the best way for rural Christian communities to grow your youth population? Breed. No. So I've done a little bit of volunteer work, and I've been members of some rural churches. And when I was going to church in McIntosh, Minnesota, which is when I was going to church in McIntosh, Minnesota, something one of the old gentlemen said. McIntosh is a pretty small farming community, about halfway between Bemidji and Grand Forks. For those of you who don't know, and if you don't know what those towns are, those are like the big towns up here. So, yeah. Both of those towns are smaller than my high school district back home. But now I live in Minnesota. So basically, what this guy said was he was talking about when he was a kid, when they did confirmation. Confirmation was a rite of passage. It was a rite of manhood, basically. Those of you who don't know, confirmation in traditional Lutheranism, we baptize our children, and then as they become adolescents, as they're old enough to start making their own choices about life, then we give them a chance to either confirm or deny the faith that their parents baptized them into. The Lutheran understanding of that is that God does all the work to save us, and then the choice that we have is to jump overboard or not, right? And this makes sense if you look at when the big decisions on the devil says the corrupted channel. I don't believe you. You may work for him, or you may find it appealing to think so, but the real thing doesn't typically walk around saying it so much. So anyway, the idea, Cam, that to answer your question is here in traditional Lutheranism. I'm TuneLink. Hey, TuneLink, Brady. You have when you're old enough, teenagers, to make your own decisions, then you make them, and once from there on, you're basically theologically responsible for your decisions. Now, back in the day, when you did your confirmation at like 12, 13, you from that point on, you did everything with the men of the church, right? So the idea of a youth group really didn't exist. Once you had your confirmation, you went to adult Bible study. You were learning manhood alongside the men. You were part of the community of men. And while that was happening, the kids who were confirmed would stay in the church because they got to be part of the adult members of the community. And in the 50s and 60s, hi, Kyrie Irving, pleasure to meet you. Then they would stay, right? So in the 20s and 30s, when these guys, in 40s, when these guys were confirmed, and they were then expected to be part of the community of men, they were there, and because among other things, the church just said this: you just went through these years of study and this vow you made in public. Steals NBA, you're good at Fortnite. Yeah, you're totally not Colton. No, I believe it. I'm really not that good at Fortnite, but I'm digressing. So what's going on right now, Cam, is we're asking these kids to study for 2 or 3 years and asking them the choice to make this take adult responsibility for their ethics and their religion, and then we turn around and we basically tell them that it's all a joke, it's a lie, right? Yes, you've taken your vows. And the confirmation vows, these are based on medieval oaths of fealty, right? These are no joke. This is very similar to the kind of things you'd be swearing if you were going to be, swearing an order of knighthood, or in Anglo-Saxon England at 12, everybody, they didn't have police as such. Everybody at 12 or 13 took an oath to uphold the king's law, and then you were legally responsible for reporting or not reporting. So everybody was part of the community. Everybody's part of the law system. And now what we've ended up doing is making confirmation a joke. And so we're basically setting up our kids to tell them, that they don't matter. And nobody really wants to stick around and be shoved off to one side. The youth groups that really matter are the youth groups that are part of the regular day. I really would like to see the point where there's no such thing as a youth group anymore in the church, where we get back to, apprentice manhood and womanhood, and that was done in the community of the people who were already men and women. So I would like to see kids, once they get confirmed, be part of the community of men alongside them. Obviously they're not going to be, at 13, 14, nobody is as mature or as capable or as big as or as strong as an adult. But when we make that rite of passage matter, we're going to make it more of a memory. And when we expect our kids to be part of the adult life of the church, then they're giving them a place where they matter, and where everything they've just said, we're reaffirming everything we've just told them. And I think that's how you're going to have a long-term youth group, or a long-term membership of young people in your churches. Let me know if that makes sense, or any other questions. Although, yes, getting married and having children, breeding will produce more youth. You need to bring modern worship music into the churches to replace the old hymns because it will reach the youth better. No, hell no. Culturally appropriating the world's way of doing things has never really worked. Christianity has, traditional Christianity has its own brand of music, it's its own style. Hymns are a unique expression that belong to us. Additionally, not that there aren't some bad hymns, but by and large, modern music is done from the modern point of view, which is me, I, me, my. There's a great little clip that Worldview Everlasting's YouTube channel did all the time, parodying a popular praise and worship song. It's all about me. Also, the modern music tends to focus much more on enthusiasm. So it isn't really a question as much of what instruments as generational attitudes. Whereas the hymns that have stood the test of time are hymns that focus on what Christ has already accomplished, how God's promises are relevant. And those are true for people, whether they're young or whether they're old. Well, it's good not to forget four-part harmony. But the more that we focus on Christ, right, the theology of the cross rather than the theology of glory, right, if we're focused on how glorious I feel, how dedicated I am, even the there's some really terrible old hymns like "I surrender all," "I surrender all," "I will do this," "I'm so dedicated," "I'm so enthusiastic." Well, what do you know of somebody who suffers from clinical depression or who's just lost their children is sitting in the back and you're expecting them to jump up and down with the praise and worship, leader in time with the strobe lights and the fog machine. Some of the best hymns in the world have been written by people who have lived their entire lives struggling hideously with depression, but they focus on the unchanging nature of God's love and what God's accomplished for them, and they can get just as much out of worship. Whereas if we turn it into a youth enthusiasm fest, we're going to miss out on a lot. And it seems like I'm pandering to old people. I'm not, right? Um, by the time I was in a youth group as such, say eighth grade, ninth grade, and on, I've already been abused twice. I was already dealing with suicidal thoughts. I wasn't all that peppy. I didn't feel all that pure. I wasn't all that, excited. But I didn't need Jesus less, and Jesus' promises weren't less meaningful to me. So there was a lot of feeling of estrangement. But like youth group was a place for the good, happy, perky, popular people, and I wasn't good, I wasn't happy, I wasn't perky, and I wasn't popular. So that carries through. You don't belong in youth group because it's a clique, and you don't fit in with the clique. So GTFO, get the bleep out. Which did not help me. Whereas, ironically, my last confirmation teacher, this celibate lesbian, who took the Bible very seriously, took a lot of time to care about me one on one, and to invite the deep questions. What does this mean? Why do we do this? What about this? What about that? How does this affect the world? And she basically saved my faith in a time when I could easily have either hurt myself or just lapsed into atheism. You know, um, and that was Pastor Elaine Laporis in the ELCA church. But she really took it seriously, and she took me seriously. She treated me like an adult, or she treated me like a human being, who was wanted and valuable. And that, more than any sound system, is going to matter. The world is always going to do flashy, fun, excitement better than God. God does joy. The world does. There's a really good old Bill Cosby routine about creation, where the joke goes like this: God made a tree, said, good. Mankind made a refrigerator, said, awesome. God made a rabbit, said, good. Mankind made a car, said, incredible. The refrigerator runs hot and the car broke down, but the trees are still up and the rabbits are still running. Make sense? But yeah, there's nothing wrong with letting the secular world have its kind of music and letting your faith have another kind of music. That can be something special. That can be something appealing, if it's done well, if it's taken seriously, or if you give people time to think about what they're actually singing. Makes sense? You're not. You were looking forward to this, Cam. You're really giving me the Q&A. You've got some actual questions thrown my way. I haven't had this much. All right. A wise man once said we should not submit to the world and remain passive, but instead become warrior monks. Biblical and theological basis of this idea. Well, I am a warrior monk, right? I mean, I'm a celibate Christian who lives alone and dedicates his life to labor and prayer and martial arts. And medieval monks actually were famous warriors. They were renowned wrestlers. Wrestlers in medieval senses included quarterstaff, short sword, boxing, and wrestling. So if you want to think about it, they were basically jujitsu practitioners, even in the West. They just didn't have a fancy name for it, or hyper organized. Theological basis. God, through the Holy Spirit, by His grace, is in the constant process of making us over in God's own image, and God is a warrior. The strength that we have in God is from God's might. Psalm 43 begins in Hebrew, Yahweh Roi Lo Chesar. But Yahweh, I am, is my shepherd. Good. And any Hebrew who knew the Torah, who knew the book of the law, when does Yahweh first show up as a name of God? When does I am show up? Yeah, actually. They would immediately go to the burning bush. When Moses says, well, who should I say sent me? I am. And what came from I am? The complete ass kicking of the military superpower of the world. And the humiliation of the most powerful magical tradition at the time until the rise of Zoroastrianism about 700 years later. That I am, right? So the guy who can overpower the most impressive military power, that is my shepherd. Therefore I have peace. If God is weak and good, God's irrelevant, right? If God is strong, and that's how you get like some new age stuff or the Force, right? If where the good is just kind of there and the bad, it can be just as strong. There's no peace there. If you get God of Islam who is strong but not good, there's no peace there. More than 80% of all armed conflicts in the world have Muslims on one or both sides of the conflict. Therefore, not a source of peace. But a God who is both strong and benevolent, there is peace, and that's the origins of the psalm. And if we are to be godlike, then we should be strong in character, strong in body, strong in mind, so that we can be agents of peace. Ultimately, of course, we're going to fail at all those things, right? We're not going to be as strong as we could. We're not going to be as moral as we could. We're not going to be as smart or wise as we could. Therefore, we must constantly follow the revealed wisdom, strength, and goodness of God's word and go forward with the help of his Holy Spirit, trusting in the ongoing effects of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on our behalf so that we can have peace and be a source of peace for those around us. How did I do? If you want further biblical ideas that God is not averse to the militant nature, now I advise monks, but I'm a Celtic style monk, right? I don't live in a cloister. I'm part of the community, and the Celtic monks did this. I don't believe in celibacy. I've chosen celibacy as the best path for me, but I don't have it as a rule. If I were to found an order of monks, it wouldn't be a rule. People could marry and have kids and raise their families because, again, they're part of the community. And that didn't really get started until the Cluniac reforms in 950 in Catholic Church history. But Celtic monks were not necessarily celibate, and many religious orders weren't celibate until like around the year 1000. It was admired for people who could live that way, but it wasn't required. I think that's exactly what the New Testament spells out. If you go to the first or second chapter of Judges, I'm doing dishes, so I don't have my Bible open to me. You're going to find that one of the reasons God says he preserved the other enemy nations around them was so that every generation could be trained for war. That's one of God's purposes, right? When God speaks to Joshua, he says, "Be strong and courageous," and then turns around and bases that strength and courage on the fact that God is with you, which is kind of what I've already talked about. We have David talking about God training his hands for war, and this is a man after God's own heart. Not that David was sinless, nope, not even a little bit. The centurion, the faith of the centurion is praised. And when Jesus talks about what should soldiers do, he says, don't complain about your wages. He doesn't say don't become a pacifist or don't train for war, or don't be, the part of the most badass military establishment in the known world at the time. He says, don't kvetch about your wages, So God is a mighty warrior, and therefore he's able to bring and establish peace. And I think that I would personally advocate every free man be a martial artist and be armed so that they can be agents of peace and best able to love their neighbors and people around them. Here endeth the lesson. But I mean, this is the kind of truth that I talk about all the time when I write books, right? I write about heroes, and the heroes face challenges, not because my heroes are innately bigger or stronger than everybody around, although writing typically does tend to end that, but they go through the challenges for the sake of the people that they love and the people that they're protecting and the people who can't protect themselves. That's kind of a theme. It's a unique theme in Judeo-Christian, or post-Judeo-Christian theology. If you look at the mythologies and the lore and the poetry, the dreams and ideals of pagan cultures, the strong take for themselves and for their glory and the immortality of their glory. It isn't to protect, it isn't to preserve, it isn't to provide for their people. It is for their own, it is for them and themselves and their immediate kin as extensions, basically, of their own dicks. So not necessarily as admirable, not necessarily as good. So I prefer the godly way of being a warrior. Good question so far, Cam. This has been very fun. Oh, I don't know how far you are away from Virginia. I thought you said it was like 45 minutes away. But there's a new martial arts school there in the Virginia Mall that you might enjoy. It's Range Martial Arts East. So there's a shameless plug for us. After saying every martial man should be a martial artist, then it would be kind of stupid to say, yeah, figure it out for yourself. But Tang Sudo, which is Chuck Norris's original martial art, and also Heidong Gumdo, which is a soft style sword style for people of all ages and physical abilities. I don't know how the heart thing's going, but might be willing to look into it. They're associated with some instructors in their 60s, and they have some bigger guys and work with kids. So they're good at working with people of all builds and ages and abilities. I can attest to that. Pretty good folks. Kind of pagan, but we are going to avoid everybody who isn't a believer in the world. We're going to do that failed experiment of running out and making our monasteries and ignoring people's plights instead of being there to help them. School in Duluth, school in. They were founded originally by a school of the Duluth. They're part of the World Tang Soo Do Association, which is actually an international crew, mostly all through North America. So if you do end up transferring or moving out of the Iron Range, there's almost always going to be a school within driving range that has some connection to them. And one of the things that I don't necessarily like, all the bureaucracy is part of it, but that does allow for some consistency in education, and it lets you make more of a long-term investment of a martial art instead of only being able to train in your art while you're in your town. Sorry, I'm still chuckling. I got to kill a major character in the third Adrian Campbell book this week, and I'm still giggling about it. Yes, writers are terrible, horrible, evil people. If you can give a character a good death, then it's good. It's fun to write. Everything ends. But it's not a question of whether something ends. It's a question of whether their ending is worthwhile. Favorite character death of all time? Wow, that's rough. I'm gonna go with Darth Vader. Although Darth Vader is the source of one of my epic standing rants about the complete lack of mercy and redemption in American culture. But I'm going with Vader. It seems like a cop out, but now, as much as I admire Vader's death, I hate Vader's syndrome. Because if you think about, and Vader's syndrome is what I call America's idea that the job of a bad guy when they repent is to die, either physically die or symbolically die through exile or walking away, you know, which is it's a diametrically opposite to the redemption that we have in Christ. Now, this is so dynamic and this is so shocking. You look in the early church, most people are completely horrified to discover that. The record from the early church, which is the second century, so the mid 100s, late to mid 100s, the Didache, the two paths, is a summary of the apostles' teaching written down by the early church. And one of the summaries of this is one of the early, the earliest church constitutions, you might say, or catechisms written down, is that if you did not reconcile with the person that you forgave, you were excommunicated. That's how seriously they took it, and how completely opposed, 100% different that is than how American churches do things. But, to go to the Vader thing, Anakin Skywalker was as powerful as a Jedi Master before he fell. Spent another 30 years training, or another 20 years training. Knew the entire, knew all of the structure, all of the administrative, functions of and the military. What would happen if he hadn't have had to die, right? What if Luke had brought him back? What if he had been redeemed completely? The next, even in Star Wars Legends, which has a much happier ending than the new, Disney Abomination storyline, the new canon. But even in Star Wars Legends, there was this okay, great, but now we don't know what it means to be a Jedi, and we have to find the Masters, and we have to find the records. And if they had had enough mercy to keep Vader alive and to take him back, they would have been 40 years ahead when they went back. And it would have been a total victory. And then instead of Luke, trying to bumble around to figure out what the Jedi are, a living Jedi would be what's left. Been playing Knights of the Old Republic again, and it's made me really want to run a new Star Wars campaign. My friends don't necessarily like Star Wars as a vessel, but I love it. So we'll see. Thinking of getting that started this summer. What are my thoughts on Disney deciding to declare all books non-canon? They're dicks. They want to design their own heroes according to their own. It's ego and it's politics, and it's stupid ego and politics. They could have just negotiated movie rights with the established story. And easily be cranking out a story a year or two, already done, already put together by the top science fiction and fantasy writers in the last 30 years. If you compare the plot of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi as episodes 7 and 8. as opposed to the first two books of Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, which was not novelization of the original plot notes for episodes 4, 7, and 8. It's not even a competition. So much better, so, and this goes on all the way through. Disney hates families, traditional families. And they're dedicated to making everybody. They're dedicated to not just destroying, but demonizing the last group, so that you'll worship their new, focus group heroes. So in the old canon, Luke and Leia. I did a whole rant. It's on the channel. You can go see it for the Last Jedi review. Warning, there's some language, but they did it so that they could tell their own story, which is stupid because the galaxy is the world is large enough that you could tell your own story anyway. You don't need to spit on the dreams of people's childhood in order to tell something new. But my general take on it, Disney isn't universally evil. Walden Media, subdivision of Disney, has done some good and was relatively faithful with the Chronicle 3, Chronicles of Narnia movies. And Pixar gets away with not being completely toxically anti-family, but that's about it. Everything else in Disney is just, it's sewage. They have not produced a loving traditional family for anybody, for their stuff over anybody preteens and up. They haven't produced a loving, traditional family since Mrs. Doubtfire, and they're never going to. The only exceptions are the properties that were produced by other things they then buy the rights for, like the goofy but excellent My Babysitter's a Vampire urban fantasy series that they bought from Canadian Broadcasting. That was done very well in terms of fantasy characterization. It was a different take on it, but it was a new and fresh take that was really a lot of fun. Most urban fantasy these days claims to, what they set the trope is your demon fighting characters are all in high school, but your high school characters lie, sleep around, do drugs, and basically act like they're in their early 20s, and not like respectable people in their early 20s, but like frat people in their early 20s. A lot of urban fantasy just turns out to be various forms of chick porn. And what My Babysitter's a Vampire did is they had the typical story, your high school underclassmen get thrown into the supernatural world, and they remain high school underclassmen, right? The school dork who gets vampire powers. Yeah, good point, Cam. The school geek who gets superpowers, the Stasi kid, is now just a spaz with vampire powers. So, like, the very next episode, there's a pilot movie and then the regular season. And in the pilot, as the first episode of the regular season, he's using vampire speed to appear, go, I'm a ninja, and, flash step off screen. And which is exactly what a spazzy 14-year-old with super speed would do. And so really good characterization for the age of the characters and a lot of fun ideas. I recommend those. Young Justice is a little edgier, but that's kind of it's a little less goofy because My Babysitter's Vampire is really kind of aimed at the tween age market. It's a little dated. They make a lot of very specific references to Twilight, for example. But if you want to look at characterization appropriate to age, that would be a good one. But they, have a loving family. They have family members who love them. But that's something produced entirely outside of the United States that Disney bought the rights to. Disney doesn't organically produce a happy family for children over 10. You can look for the stuff geared at like middle grades, second through fourth, fifth graders. Examples like that would be like the Thundermans or Henry Danger. Then you'll see them, but that you can tell once they start marketing to teens, nope, it evaporates. So I'm not a huge Disney fan anyway. Tangent alert. I did. I do apologize that I had said I was going to do a full Q&A live stream, but I was dictating a very spoilerific chapter with the death of plot, plot arc with the death of a main character and the return of a prior bad guy. And I was just getting, and it was just too spoilerific to record just for a live stream. So it's going to have to wait till the third Adrian Campbell book comes out for everybody to experience the awesomeness that is that. Oh yeah, hey. I don't know if I made that announcement on this channel, but ICANN has paperbacks. So if you like my fiction, 2 of the novels are now out for paperback, or 2, and probably a third one will be coming out soon. Next month, probably the second of the Song of Legrando books will be out for paperback. Darkblade is out, and the first of the Song of Legrando book is out. I'm waiting on cover art to come back to put the first Adrian Campbell book out on paperback too. I think I've talked you to sleep, Cam. Please give your audience an elevator pitch for Darkblade. Okay, so Darkblade is space opera. So starships and dramatic characters and a lot of high-packed fiction, high-packed action. It's got a mixture of science fiction and fantasy, which all of my stories do. Just kind of what blend does change back and forth. This is predominantly sci-fi with a lot of fantasy, so it's got a very Star Wars feel to it. It's a chase story. It says a future world where Christianity has been outlawed, and the Christians are racing to find a forgotten, a lost ship of great power called a Black Ship that will give them the ability to save themselves and get to safety from the prosecution. They're being chased by Kaith Moore, who's the best warrior of a rebel faction, who's out to kill all the Christians he can because his best friend died for becoming a Christian. He blames Christianity for it. Swords and spaceships, guns and magic, starship fight, starship chases, and interstellar travel and mysterious worlds, all done dealing with faith, remorse, guilt, belief, hope, loyalty, grace, and mercy as the big themes. So that's basically Darkblade. So if you like Star Wars, if you like space opera, if you like magic, and if you like a magic mix, then give Darkblade a shot. It's a standalone because, interestingly enough, the story is my excuse to reboot my epic fantasy timeline. A character in Darkblade is from the previous series, and he tried to change the past, and he missed, and he changed way more of it, got stranded way further back in the past than he thought, and it gets caught up in all these starship battles and stuff like that. So there's a couple of bleak references and many Easter eggs to people who had read the old young adult books, which I'm in the process of rewriting. All right. So that's basically Darkblade. How did I do? I mean, short of giving a lot of spoilers, I don't know what else I could say about it. My current reading list. Ooh, where did I put it? So I'm currently reading. Oh, that is backwards. So I'm currently reading The Gospel and the Greeks by the late Dr. Ronald H. Nash, who did the New Testament borrow from pagan thought. And this is probably at the time, he was one of the premier ancient, scholars and antiquity scholars in the United States. And he went and addressed the idea that got really popular in 1890, that Christianity stole Christmas and the resurrection and a bunch of other ideas for the worship of Horus and other Greek mystery religions. And it is nothing but a scholarly research. What did the ancient mystery religions really say? When did they say it? When did it, become known in the Roman Empire? How does that jive with these accusations? So, an apologetics research book, nummy, 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 very much like it. I'm rereading and re-recording for my nephew A Wolf Story by James Byron Huggins, which when I was doing youth work was like my go-to morality tale for adolescent boys. Rather than listen to dirty jokes all night, I would read to the kids until they fell asleep at Bible camp. And this was one of the stories that I read after I tried a different book that gave kids like screaming nightmares. Like, maybe a little too much. I'll dial that back. And A Wolf Story was pretty good, and I could get through it mostly in a week. And I have a nephew who's got dyslexia, so I'm going to be reading this out loud a couple of minutes every day so that he can enjoy the story. And it's also, he's like 11 and he's really kind of afraid of a lot of stuff. So I am really working hard on trying to give him sources of connecting his faith to courage. That's kind of my idea. So these are the two books currently reading. I'm listening to the Codex Alera once again at work this week. I get through about a book every other day at work. So I'm about halfway through the Codex Alera by Jim Butcher. Very much looking forward to his Dresden Files short story and anthology coming out. And I'm also listening through to Dio Appius's Roman history. He is a Roman historian in the 3rd century AD who wrote about the founding of Rome in 43 volumes. We have something like 39 of them still exist, and most of what we know of Roman history comes from Appius. So I'm writing. I'm reading through Dio Appius in small doses. Listening to that, but there's only so much, and it's written in classical Greek, so it very much carries through this. And then came into them into high antiquity, where he placed himself in the forefront of the throne, and having acquitted himself well, was found most excellent in combat. And it's like that nonstop. But I'm going to learn more about. I'm getting a better handle. And I'm reading in response to the California law basically banning the ex-gay movement. I'm reading an excellent law paper from the Brigham Young Law University about legislating therapeutic choices in sexual orientation change. And why legislating what therapeutic choices people can and can't make is a really bad plan. So that's what I'm reading right now. Those 5 books. Why is there not a larger section of good Christian fantasy and science fiction? Short answer, because I have to work a day job in order to pay for food. Okay, so science fiction, good Christian sci-fi and fantasy reading list. I need to put together a more efficient list. Read my stuff. No, seriously, this was when I grew up. There was nothing for me. There was very little for me, and I, slogged through many very bad stories to find a couple good ones. But as a nerd, Once I hit puberty, I actually cared about sex, and they didn't talk about it at all. Um, yeah, unless it was a lecture book, this story is an excuse to give you a lecture on how to be good. That's not good Christian sci-fi and fantasy. Um, you know, there was like Puritan books that had no action that was worth anything, like The Adventures in Odyssey. Um, there were end of the world books, but they were not really, was it the Firebird trilogy was okay. I can basically name on one hand on my fingers the number of Christian books, and I think I have some of them here. So get ready, I'm gonna go right. So I'm gonna pitch myself again. Darkblade by Bruce Burns is a good start for an introduction to my style of fiction. I wrote this, mind you, 19 years ago. I've gotten better since then, and I'm working on it. I think the Song of the Legrando books my Song of the Legrando books are much better. A Wolf Story by James Byron Huggins is allegorical fantasy, talking animals, etc. But there's some fun ideas. The theology isn't amazing, but the story writing is pretty solid. It's out of print. Get a used copy. It's worth the fine. And I haven't gone away. I'm just picking up new books. Oh, I donated them to my church. Of course, in modern terms, Christians invented the fantasy genre in its modern iteration. So, other good fantasy, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, and The Hobbit are all written by a die-hard intellectual Christian. Those are good reads. The Chronicles of Narnia are more allegorical than I like. They are good fantasy. Technically, I'd categorize them as urban fantasy because they are about people. The stories are about modern people experiencing a fantasy world, even though they get plucked out into them. So they're part journey monologue. Let's see. Um, for upper grades, right? Yeah, middle grades, like the kind of there's the Imperia. There's a couple series by Stephen Lawhead that are overtly Christian that I would recommend. The first three and only the first three books of the Pendragon cycle, which he takes the Arthurian legends and the Welsh mythology and he weaves them together quite well. He's got and so that is the first book is Taliesin, the second book is Merlin, and the third book is Arthur. And read them in that order. I read them in continuous loop. Historical fiction slash fantasy, The Throne of Tara by John Desjarlais is about is a fictionalized account of the young man who would grow up to convert the first Scottish kingdom to Christianity. His name's Columba of Iona. There's some fantastic, fantasy elements in that story. But there's a lot of fantastical elements in the actual like oral traditions of the Celtic Church. That's not completely out of place. The Firebird series, and I forget the author. I read them about 20 years ago. They're not bad. That's more sci-fi, kind of interesting. Like the Jewish stand-in people there gave themselves telepathy so that they could broadcast faith in Christ, and so they're faith in God, and so they're forbidden to evangelize as punishment for trying to take away the free will of other people. Was kind of interesting. I'm gonna dig around a little bit. I think I have a copy of the book that probably taught me how to write bad guys. One of the most informative books is a bit of Christian fantasy. So again, very old, out of print, very old and out of print book called The Falcon and the Serpent by Cheryl A. Smith. All right. If you can find a copy, it's worthwhile. It was originally published by Cheryl Smith. The Christianity is kind of a joke because it's all just, I have a dream vision and I'm led to do this, and that's not necessarily Christianity as such. But the villain is very good. If you've seen my Beast Lords and a lot of my build, you will see very much. You'll be able to detect immediately. A mainstream published author who is kind of Christian and a little New Agey, but has some strong Christian themes. Actually, there's the books, not the terrible New Age movies, but books. First 3 books in the Wrinkle of Time series by Madeleine Engel. She was a liberal Christian, but she was she's like an ELCA style liberal Christian, but she's a Christian. The very first book is 3 angels help some kids find their mother. Help find their lost father and stand up to evil in a world with the help of and guidance of angels. The second book is a kind of fantastic voyage, more science fiction, where the fight takes place inside the cellular biology of a person, fighting the Echthroid, and it's about Farah and mitochondria and other microbiological cellular structures that are being affected by a demonic attack, creating an illness. And the kids, travel into the cellular biology to fight evil. And the third one is a time travel book, A Swiftly Tilting Planet, centered around Celtic prayer as kids travel back through the timeline and ancestry of a Welsh dictator who's getting ready to start World War III, and nuclear annihilation. Because this was written in like the early 80s when it was still very possible. So the kids time travel back through and change little details and fighting to turn this world-ending dictator into a good person by, healing the wounds of his family and critically, invoking God's supernatural intervention in critical points. So those are actually Christian fantasy. There are strong Christian themes in the Dresden Files books by Jim Butcher, and they get more Christian as you go on. When he was writing for college, obviously there was none of that. As soon as he wasn't writing for college, Christianity started to play a larger and larger theme. It's not an overtly Christian series, but he's got a pretty good grasp on grace. Stephen R. Lawhead, I would also recommend the Empyrean Cycle by Lawhead is very good. Christian sci-fi deals with, among other things, the idea of Christian cosmology. The idea of Christian cosmology, and that they go through a wormhole. And if the idea in Christian cosmology is if the world is the center of time and space, the further as you get, you're going to have increased time dilation because you're moving away from the center. So it's a combination of Einsteinian theory and the record of Genesis. And so there's a colony that's founded through a wormhole. They don't report back for like 20 years, and the main characters are the follow-up expedition to see what happened to the colony jumping through the wormhole, and it's 3,000 years later, when they show up, which is very interesting. And so you have this fantastic world in a relatively high-tech sci-fi setting. That's very cool. So it's a 2-book series called the Empyrean Cycle by Stephen Lawhead. I would recommend that. A lot of Lawhead stuff is kind of hit or miss, but those I would recommend wholeheartedly. How am I doing for no good Christian fiction so far? But yeah, there's a lack of it. And I think there's a lack. One of the problems is the gatekeepers of Christian publishing are Christian publishing houses, and their target audience are 36-year-old stay-at-home moms, right? That's their test audience. They're not really good at the rest. When I was a teenager, I cared incessantly about sex, sexuality, romance. I was becoming a man, and so I, or wanted to grow up to be a man, and I cared about honor and duty and valor and, and that. And it's, so those 2 things show up in my fiction endlessly. I grew up as a comic books and Star Wars fan, So high drama and comic book style action, and I write that endlessly. There's not a lot of that. It got to the point where I was so starving for the fiction I started writing it, and I still am. But yeah, no, there are people who are trying. It's hit and miss, and writing's like C.S. Lewis's space trilogy is going to go over the heads of. I think it's so intelligently written that an American graduate of public school system, am I a American graduate of the public school system is simply not going to be able to understand 60% of it, so I don't recommend it as such. Asexual asks, am I a paleontologist? I'm not. I'm just a Christian, grew up as a science nerd, and I've studied a bunch of different disciplines. I currently work in manufacturing. I write science fiction and fantasy books, and I basically devour everything I get my hands on in terms of learning. But I used to be kind of an old evolutionary kind of person growing up. I remember we moved out to the farm when I was 9. So that had been my eighth birthday when one of when my uncle showed up drunk and said to my mom right in front of me, "Jesus Christ, thought when can we get the little freak something other than science encyclopedias?" Do I swear on my Christian channel? I'm a Lutheran, right? I'm a descendant, but I'm the theological descendant of a guy who referred to the Pope as fart ass. So I don't know what that tells you about, but but I just mostly try to be real. All right, so it looks like he went away. He, she, it is asexual. LOL. Oh yeah. So that was a little tangent. No, that's actually not true. In the New Testament, we are commanded not to engage in coarse joking, in off-color humor, because quote such thing has no place in God's people. And in the book of James, which is written to both believers and non-believers, you have the commandment that whoever does not restrain their tongue, the religion is useless. So it's not completely forbidden, but it isn't something we're supposed to roll around in, to be sure. They're gone. Oh well. Yep. Among other things, I take it in moderation because I've looked at some more literal translations of the Old Testament. Yeah. We would edit a lot of that out for content before we let kids read it. Particularly like the books of prophets, where we've got Israel depicted as a young woman with her legs spread naked under a tree on a hill for whoever wants to come by and plow for her. And that's like a common image in the Minor Prophets. So we're not supposed to be profane, but the Bible does not draw the same lines as, say, like Victorian England. So sorry, that was quite a rant. My favorite Minor Prophets. Now, how are we defining the Minor Prophets? Because the major prophets are Elijah and Elisha, Jeremiah and Isaiah and Jeremiah. So everybody who isn't those four is considered a minor prophet. There's a lot of good theology in Ezekiel, but there's a lot that's very difficult to understand. I prefer the Book of Joel, actually, if I'm really going to be honest. I like the Book of Joel. It's got law and gospel, judgment and mercy, punishment and redemption. Um, so, yes, that's my favorite book of the minor prophets. Hosea would be a close second, simply because for same reason. Punishment and grace, undeserved love and mercy, and truth, all put together. Hosea is another one of my favorite theological drum beats, which is the whole like forgiveness and reconciliation thing, because that's the whole point of Hosea. Sorry, simple question, simple answer. Supposed to be a first transplant of human head the next year. Skeptical. Nerve endings are hard to connect. I'm not sure that it would really happen, because the primary thing is we don't know how to repair or connect nerve tissue. That would be an immense leap forward in medical technology. If you can't reconnect nerve tissue, then you have somebody with a severed spinal column and a new head. So congratulations, you're paraplegic. Go. I don't understand the question. Whose should would it have? Who? I don't make these decisions for other people. Nobody would. Nobody, and I can only make those decisions for myself. Yeah, I get it. You have to transplant somebody's head to somebody else's body. The ultimate in organ donation. What organs are you donating? All of them. Those of you who are following the news this week, this is an excellent law article about the new California law, who is forbidding people who want to find a way to reconcile unwanted homosexual feelings with their religion. It was done when California banned it for kids, and California just this past week banned it for everybody. And that's pretty much evil, but that's about it. I thought that throw that up as a random tangent. See, that's the idea of head transplants kind of squicks me out, because there's kind of an idea in the Bible that only one person the body isn't an interchangeable part. Yeah, you're not allowed to have it. They've outlawed even offering it. So you're not allowed to choose to try and make that path. The only legal option you're allowed to talk about. It's kind of like those places where you're not allowed to talk about anything but abortion, except with sexual orientation stuff. Yeah, in the law, you're not allowed to talk about it, promote it, or advertise it, much less, attempt it. So hey, I'm illegal in California. because one of the things I do is volunteer work with the oldest ex-gay ministry in the world. Well, several, like here in Minnesota, pastors are actually licensed under psychotherapy laws, so it would apply to them. It's one of the reasons why, no matter what the Bible says about grace, etc., you can never have a pastor who has ever like committed a sex crime. Also, there's passage in Timothy that a pastor has to have the respect of the community so that your church isn't disgraced. So there's a biblical reason too. But no, pastors are licensed under the same set of laws here in Minnesota as therapists. So if you made this illegal for therapists, you'd make it illegal for pastors as well. I already know of one licensed therapist whose response to that was, "Well, I'm an outlaw," and that was it. Because for that person, there was absolutely no choice between Jesus and a law that goes against Jesus. Well, they passed it already for minors, like last year, 2 years ago, and now they passed it for all adults. And it was a terrible idea then too. Among other things, Zuga Army. Hey, how's it going? So I'm up late and doing a Q&A. So if you have any questions, this is my Bruce the Monk channel. So hello from Chile. Welcome. I'm up here in North America, but I talk mostly about Christianity and defenses of the Christian faith, also nerd stuff. So ask me whatever you'd like. I'll give it my best shot. Or I'll try to find you somebody who can give you the answer you want, that you need, necessarily the answer that you want. No, American. Close to the Canadian border, though, so I will probably sound very similar if you watch enough TV to hear our accents. So I live in the Great Plains, in the middle of North America, in the state of Minnesota, which is, yeah, right in the middle. About 100 miles away from the Canadian border. But hey, welcome to my channel. I'm doing good. I'm staying up late, taking a break from writing novels to answer questions about Christianity randomly, which I find fun. And I'm cleaning my apartment, which needed to happen, which is also good, even if it isn't necessarily fun. Let me know if I talk too fast. I have that trouble abroad where even if I understand everything that gets said, it gets said very quickly. Oh, and it's back to just Cam, assuming it's still just Cam. Did you leave me, Cam? Did you abandon me? What are you gonna do? Sleep at night? I feel bad. You should be sleeping at night, right? We've had these talks. There's the law I was telling you about. That's not the actual text of the law, that's the cover, but I would read the actual text of the law. It's pretty impressive. Machining. I run an industrial mill or a lathe. Basically, what you do is you hand me a blueprint and you hand me I need a part that's shaped like this. You hand me a block of the material needed part made out of, and I program a machine, and set up the tools and write the program for the machine to come down with these really high pressure tools to carve that part out of a block of material. That's my job in a nutshell. I do what's called prototyping, which is or onesie twosie, meaning small runs. Like I might make 2 to 8 different types of 2 to 8 different types of part a day, or if I'm doing a production run, I might make 1,000 of the same part in the same day. What type of tooling do I use? Depends on what time. It varies by what material I'm working. Mild steels, harder steels use different tools than say aluminums, or plastics, or we've even done wood or brass. So different kinds of mills and drills and taps get used for the various kind of. So I use end mills, reams, taps, bores, boring bars. That's most of what I use. Vices, lots of vices, and high-powered spindles. Lathes use basically the same thing, except instead of turning the tool, they turn the part and have a stable. Do I ever design for fun? No. Only the demise of my science fiction and fantasy characters. That's fun. I think if it's okay, I might wrap up. Been talking a lot, so my voice is getting a little hoarse. I might get a little nap before work. But thanks for showing up and giving me some content for my Q&A. And keep an eye out for future Bruce Burns novels coming out. I'm working on them as quickly as I can. Again, Pushing Back should be coming out as soon as I get the cover art. And then, yeah, that's it. And until I can fall asleep, I'm going to keep working on the third Adrian Campbell book. All right, peace.